Okay, good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to our brown bag learning event as Twendembele. Just a few ground rules. For this session, we both have English as well as French interpretation because we've got colleagues from Niger and Benin joining the brown bag learning event. So when we are speaking in French, there is French interpretation available just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You will find the French interpretation icon. You can join there. And then when we have the question and answer session, the English-speaking colleagues can also go and join the interpretation and join the English icon when there is a French speaker asking a question or responding to a particular insight. So once again, welcome, colleagues. I am Ayabulela Dlakavu, the program manager of Twendembele. And we welcome you to this brown bag learning event focusing on stakeholder mapping, especially in the context of evaluations. Let me just pull up the program for today so that I speak to it for your convenience. So that is the official program for today. I'll be welcoming the speaker, the keynote speaker in due course, Mr. Dieter Gijsbrechts. From IDEV at the African Development Bank. I'll give his bio officially in a few minutes. And then the order of the learning event today is essentially that after introducing the speaker, I will hand over to Dieter, who will give us his insights on stakeholder mapping. Thereafter, his presentation will break into a question and answer session where colleagues can engage with the presentation, give their insights. And Mr. Dieter Gijsbrechts, we've got quite a number of public sector officials here, so no doubt you will have a lot of insights and questions from our colleagues in governments across the Twendembele network. And then after the question and answer session, I will move to close the event, as well as announce the next Twendembele learning event, which will be next year in February 2023. So that is the program for today, colleagues. Let me stop sharing. Mr. Dieter Gijsbrechts, very welcome, sir, as our keynote speaker. Colleagues, for your convenience, let me briefly give you a background on Mr. Dieter Gijsbrechts. He is a Principal Knowledge Management Officer with IDEV at the African Development Bank. In this role, he contributes to improving IDEV's impact on the work of the African Development Bank and the region through engagement with key stakeholders on evaluative knowledge. Prior to joining IDEV in 2018, he led strategic communications at various complexes and initiatives of the African Development Bank. And before joining the African Development Bank, he provided technical assistance to governments in human resources in the health sector for the World Bank. He has also held media research positions at CNBC Europe and the BBC World Service Trust, now known as Media Action. Mr. Dieter Gijsbrechts holds a master's degree in contemporary war and peace studies from the University of Sussex in the UK, and a bachelor's degree in African Studies from the School of Oriental and African Studies, also at the University of London, also in the United Kingdom. So with that brief bio, let me hand over to Mr. Dieter Gijsbrechts for his presentation. I think, Dieter, do you want me to project your presentation, or you are comfortable dictating the pace of that presentation by yourself, because you are able to share? I've given you rights.
I think I'll try by myself. If there are any problems, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Over to you, Dieter.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dlakavu. I would also just like to thank everyone for joining, and Twendembele for this a wonderful opportunity for IDEV to be able to share with you our approach to stakeholder mapping. I think it's going to be very interesting, I hope, and I'm very much looking forward to the question and answer session. You know, I say it's an approach. There's many ways of doing these kind of things, so I think it'll be very insightful for IDEV as well. To see what kind of feedback we get, what kind of responses. So without further ado, let me open the presentation and share. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay. Are you all able to see the presentation? Somebody let me know.
Yes, thank you.
Quite visible.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, thank you. I'll be telling you today a little bit about our approach to stakeholder mapping. So I'm sure you're quite aware about what IDEV is, since we're partners. But just a quick recap: IDEV is the evaluation function of the African Development Bank, and so our through evaluation provide learning for the bank to improve the work of the bank as a form of accountability, and to build a culture of evaluation and learning within the bank, within our partners and in member countries of the African Development Bank. So today's presentation, I'm going to try and keep it quite brief. I will try and do two things today. One is to kind of just say a little bit about our approach to stakeholder mapping, kind of where we're coming from, why we find it important. And then I'll give you provide a step-by-step kind of guide to how we do our stakeholder mapping with just some examples. So first, our approach to stakeholder mapping, it derives from our knowledge management approach, essentially. So the bank is focused, the IDEV is focused on catalyzing learning by the AFDB and its partner development and better lives for Africans, essentially. So and we do this through evaluation and the sharing and dissemination of evaluation knowledge. And thus, for every evaluation, we consider that there are some key stakeholders. The background to the evaluation is not a promotional product. It's not a rubber stamping of a set of projects that is, deemed by the board of directors. It's really a product that has a function for improving the bank's work. So as such, for this function, we have our stakeholders. We have people who and groups of people who have specific needs related to the knowledge in these evaluations. So for that reason, we consider these evaluations to all have our stakeholders, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that really means. And so for every evaluation, we develop a dissemination plan, which involves thinking about stakeholder mapping, and then matching that with knowledge needs, and trying to figure out what from each evaluation we can kind of take out to disseminate to specific stakeholders through workshops, through knowledge products, through disseminating the reports, and this is all encapsulated in our dissemination plan. So stakeholder mapping is not all, but it is a very important part of this dissemination plan. And as Dr. Lakavu said, that next year in February, there'll be another learning session, which also is kind of part of the dissemination plan, which will kind of go into the dissemination aspect of these things. So therefore, stakeholder mapping is done for all evaluations. And essentially what it does, it identifies the stakeholders, who they are, what their roles are vis-a-vis the evaluation. We kind of rank them a little. It's not really ranking. We kind of break them down into specific groups to try and figure out who has the specific knowledge needs and how to best reach those people. And this then guides the dissemination. And just to say, our stakeholder mapping has evolved between the last 5 years. So we've kind of evolved our stakeholder mapping, and together as a team work to kind of to make it stronger. And as such, we've also evolved and developed new knowledge products, new ways of reaching out to people, like through workshops, through blogs, and things on our website, things like that. So, yeah. So importantly to think about, when I say stakeholder, who is a stakeholder? For some people who work in evaluation, they might be focused on specific aspects of evaluation, and then for example, you might have people who would consider that evaluations are very important to, let's say, the board of directors of International Development Bank, like the African Development Bank. But actually, evaluations are important to a very varied and large group of people. And here are just some examples. This is not like this does not include everyone, but for example, you have country counterparts. If you have an evaluation of a set of projects in a specific country, it's very important for those countries to kind of also know what the thinking about the lessons are of those evaluations, what has worked, what hasn't, and why. You have the management of the bank, you have beneficiaries, you have the board of directors, you have bank departments, etc. And through the evaluation, there's a transfer of knowledge, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well, because some roles include sharing knowledge for the evaluation as well as receiving knowledge coming out of the evaluation, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then, so why map out these stakeholders? Well, it's very important to understand them. It's important to understand the users, owners, and the participants who all have different knowledge needs. For example, the knowledge needs of like on-the-ground project officers might be different to those setting up policies and strategies. So everyone has their own needs. It's important to understand the relationship between the different stakeholders and the evaluation, because this can actually improve the actual evaluations themselves. By knowing and seeing who are your key stakeholders and knowing the relationship they have, you can try and address each of those needs and build a better evaluation and ask the right questions, for example. And overall, it's very important to building an evaluation culture. I think, especially at Twende Mbele, this is talked about a lot. You know, if an entity is separate from everything else creates an evaluation and doesn't really involve stakeholders and creates these relationships and these partnerships, then they publish an evaluation and maybe some will read it, but you're not building over time a stronger relationship there. So it's also very important to have this kind of partnership mentality with all the different stakeholders of an evaluation. So that's kind of a very brief and hopefully not too quick kind of overview of IDEV's approach and mapping. So I'll give you now kind of an example of what that really means in practice. So IDEV, you know, when you think about IDEV stakeholder mapping, like you can ask, okay, when do we generally start mapping out and thinking about our stakeholders? And you can see it's kind of in a number of stages, but first off, it's at the very early stage when an evaluation is being designed. Myself and my team at IDEV who work with stakeholder mapping, we engage very early with the evaluation team, and together we try and identify already who are the key actors, players, participants, knowledge needs, groups of the of the evaluation. And we try and integrate already this in the inception report. So from the very beginning, there's a clear understanding who the key stakeholders are. However, you know, with the caveat, this can evolve because, as we'll see later, sometimes you might have information coming from an evaluation knowledge that actually ends up being relevant to additional groups. So these stakeholders and their roles are kind of elaborated in a bit more detail in what we call an early dissemination plan, where this is before the evaluation is finished. We already craft a kind of dissemination plan that is used to then publish on the website. The fact that we're doing this evaluation, to publish the approach paper, inception report of the evaluation, to already make quite clear what the plan is regarding dissemination. But we call it an early plan because sometimes these plans have to be modified according to the results of the evaluation. So then the full dissemination plan is indeed after the evaluation is complete. We can see the findings, the lessons, the recommendations, and those sometimes can dictate a little bit the approach as well. Sometimes you find that in an evaluation, certain things come up that is quite unique to these projects, or let's say it's a country program evaluation, is quite unique to the country context. So we modify our plan according to that. So if you look at in terms of the stakeholder mapping steps, we can look at it, think about it in 4 general steps. One is to identify the stakeholders, figure out who are all the people involved. We then categorize them into into specific groups according to the level of interest, the level of influence. We try and find our key knowledge partners there, and we also identify what role they have. Are they involved in the evaluation? Do they provide documentation, information, tacit knowledge? Or are they more recipients of the knowledge afterwards in terms of their knowledge needs? We then indeed identify the knowledge needs and the engagement approach with the stakeholders. And based on that, we develop a kind of a range or a suite of different knowledge products and communication activities and knowledge activities to try and reach all the stakeholders, ensure that they, as much as possible, have an ownership of the evaluation, to take on the knowledge and hopefully change and improve the work of the bank and regional member countries. So, for example, stakeholder mapping steps. So the first is identify your stakeholders. So I'm going to give an example. This is an evaluation that is actually not complete, and that's actually ongoing. But let's say, you know, the bank is currently conducting a evaluation of its emergency response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So, okay, you think about who are the stakeholders. So you have the board of directors. You know, they will be looking at this evaluation. They've been looking closely at the work of the bank in response to COVID-19. You have management who have been, you know, directing this work. You have the different departments who are carrying out, developing and implementing projects. You know, human capital development department, for example, at the bank, regional coordination offices, sector operations like health or water, sanitation. And then you have the regional member countries and government ministries who have been, you know, partnering with the bank on these initiatives. We also have our partner evaluation departments, so, you know, or our partner NDBs in general who've been coordinating with us on these initiatives. And the list goes on. This is by way not exclusive, but this is just an example of, you know, you literally kind of jot down who your partners are. And then the next step is to map them out into different groups. So some people who've worked maybe in communications or outreach, you know, campaign building might recognize this a little bit. We kind of map them out into lower interest, and high interest. So, for example, those who have been catalyzing the evaluation, who have been asking for it, who have been involved in it, usually end up being kind of on the higher interest side, especially if they've been involved in it, also the high influence side. And then the low influence are groups who maybe would be interested. They have a lot of needs of the evaluation, but they don't really affect the evaluation as much, or they don't really affect the kind of action post evaluation as much. And indeed, this is the area where there's a lot of discussion about what groups in there. It's always very tempting to put everyone in group A. You know, everyone is high. This is important for everyone. Everyone needs to know this. It's very tempting to do that. But there's a reason why you want to try and select specific groups, because all of these groups, A, B, C, and D, they will all be, you know, the knowledge will all be disseminated to all of those groups because they are all stakeholders. It's important to give the right information, the right knowledge, and in the right way to the right stakeholders. Otherwise, you're just bombarding everyone with tons of information, and then it just becomes an overload. So this is an example. So in this case, we put in the high interest, high influence. You know, these are our key champions, key knowledge management partners. We put senior management, the board of directors, the operations departments who are involved in the initiatives and interventions. The evaluation reference group. This is, you know, every evaluation has a reference group who work with evaluators throughout the entire evaluation. We put those as the high interest, high influence. Sometimes we actually put the board of directors or maybe senior management in the lower interest, because it's a specific evaluation that, yes, the board will see it, but it's not a key strategic outpoint for the African Development Bank. And in the case of COVID-19, it clearly is, because it's a very important topic. It deals with issues of fragility of the bank. It might happen again. So we have quite a large key partner group here. And then if you look at the other ones, you know, it's for example, lower interest, low influence. These knowledge partners or stakeholders still need to be provided with the right information and the right dissemination approach, but it would be quite different from the other groups. So these are, for example, partner evaluation entities, the consultants involved in the evaluation, academia, the general evaluation community. They still need to be informed. We still want them to know about the evaluation, but it's not as crucial as some of the other groups, perhaps. And then we also look at role. For example, in the case of the departments who designed and implemented intervention, they were, or have been and still are crucially involved in the evaluation. They provide source material and documentation, and they participate in interviews. It's their evaluation, and we really try and promote an ownership among stakeholders. We try and really move as far away from possible as this idea of an audit of a set of projects. We really want to say, this is your evaluation. This is going to make your projects better. We are here to help you improve your project. So, it's important to establish that role and to treat these stakeholders in such a manner. And then the board of directors, they review and approve the evaluation. So they hold another specific role and they provide input. They discuss with management the salient points about what the action of management will be. And then, for example, you have regional member countries, and their side, for them, it's often, sometimes you have also, they could also be involved in providing source material as well. Perhaps I should have put there as well. But for them also, it's very important that if it's, let's say, country sector evaluation, the use of knowledge coming from the evaluation will also inform their future strategies and interventions. So then the third step is you identify the knowledge needs and engagement approach of each of these stakeholders. So again, in this example, I focused on a specific sector department of the bank. And again, we have the role of the evaluation. I've just mentioned that. And then the knowledge needs will be like the findings, the lessons, what worked, what hasn't, why, special recommendations. And they'll be looking at these with the perspective of, okay, how do we tackle future emergency interventions, whether it's in the health sector or perhaps, let's say, food crisis, right? That's the topic that a lot of people are worried about right now. What is their approach to if there's going to be a future food crisis, how will the bank handle an emergency response to that in terms of the logistics, etc. And then you try and establish what knowledge products and knowledge approaches you want to provide here. So these people might need a summary report, perhaps a presentation, a knowledge workshop, and a brief. So there's different kind of products you can create that will specifically target these groups. And that's something my colleague in the next presentation, I think, is going to delve into a little bit more. As well as how this will be communicated. How do you engage with a stakeholder? Do you have them in your e-newsletter network? Do you send specific emails? Do you print them and ship them to their offices? So there's a lot of different entry points, and it's important to think about what the best way is. Social media, for example, is important. And then finally, so once you've done this for all your stakeholders, you then have a complete suite. So then you kind of get an idea, okay, I need to produce for all the stakeholders. Well, we definitely need a brief because these groups need this brief. Okay, I think we should have a knowledge workshop because some of the people involved in evaluation, we need to have a discussion about what are the action steps afterwards. And so you kind of tally all those up, and then you end up with essentially a shopping list of products and activities that you want to do. You identify for which stakeholder those activities are, and that all becomes part of this dissemination plan. So essentially, that's what you have at the end, right? So you just think about your evaluation is kind of a new source of new knowledge, and you need to link that knowledge and have a knowledge transfer between all these different stakeholders, whether it's through an animation, whether it's through an infographic, a presentation, a brief, a report, etc. So that kind of summarizes, I hope I haven't taken too long, the kind of approach and the step-by-step manner in which we do our stakeholder mapping. So thank you, and I open the floor for questions. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Dieter, for that thorough presentation. I think we still have time, so I'll just engage in maybe a very quick summary of what you have presented, and then I'll open it up to the floor for a Q&A. I think what struck me from your presentation is that stakeholder mapping is essentially key, especially when you want to tailor different findings to different audiences. IDEV certainly has a strategy that I think can be replicated by our government, specifically in the Twende network. And you also make a link between stakeholder mapping and developing a dissemination plan, which quite interestingly is our next learning event as Twende. I think you went to great lengths to explain that stakeholder mapping involves the classification of stakeholders on a continuum or spectrum, and then identifying the various needs or nuanced needs of different program stakeholders. And then, of course, which then determines the M&D products you make available to the various stakeholders. For instance, policymakers, in the case of our principals as Twende governments, you would have policy briefs or a certain briefing that lays out quite succinctly the key findings of the program and probably the implications of those findings for that particular program being evaluated. And I think another key insight you give is that stakeholder mapping is key to knowledge brokering, because this is quite a buzzword in the evaluation field, knowledge brokering. But essentially, you have just shown us that knowledge brokering is not something that happens at the end. You plan for it from the beginning of the evaluation, right up to when you have an evaluation report that is ready for dissemination. Stakeholder mapping is I think is very important for even governments. I know you're speaking from a position of a multilateral development bank, but you speak from an informed position because many of your partners are governments. So definitely stakeholder mapping is very important for public sectors, especially since many government interventions tend to cut across sectors. So you need to essentially map out your stakeholders quite well, especially if you look at, for instance, your poverty eradication programs. Those tend to cut across sectors. So thank you very much, Dieter, for quite a thorough presentation, which is very insightful. At this point, colleagues, let me open up to questions and answers from the participants. Just a reminder again, colleagues, when the French-speaking colleagues ask questions, you do have an option available on the interpretation link at the bottom of your Zoom screen, where you can switch to the English section, and then you will hear the question being posed. So you are quite fluid in terms of being able to hear what the French counterparts are also engaging. So thank you very much, Dieter, and colleagues. The floor is yours. You can drop your questions either on the chat or I think there's already a hand. Sarah, I think you already have your hand up. Over to you, Madam. Colleagues, you can also ask your questions on the chat, but if you want, you can verbalize them. Sarah, I think we'll take you first, Madam.
Thank you very much for such an informative presentation. You know, when he was presenting, I began to reflect that many times our evaluations are not used, probably because we haven't done sufficient work on mapping the stakeholders. Like, especially if I'm referencing the national evaluation system, the one in South Africa in particular, we have made a deliberate effort to have it embedded in our terms of reference to map as to who has an interest in a particular evaluation to end at cabinet and the policy briefs, but have we deliberately packaged maybe the recommendations? Because at times you don't have to write the 10 recommendations. You might package simple because you are targeting a specific stakeholder, maybe who is quite essential. I know we do an improvement plan, management response and all that, but it's also important that we do more work in terms of all those stakeholders that we had mentioned on our terms of reference, that this one is an interest and what is their interest. So I really thought this is quite useful and something for us to consider in South Africa to say, why our evaluation is not utilized? There's more ground that needs to be done. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for those insights. So Dieter, I take it you've noted. So I'll take a round of 3 and then you can sort of respond. On the chat, Mr. Alois Ratemo writes that thank you so much for this insightful presentation. My question, and this is the question, Dieter, is there any challenge in stakeholder mapping? And then the second part of the question is, how can one handle situations where we have stakeholders with different interests as well as needs? So that is the other question, Dieter. Yeah, and then maybe I can even throw in my own Dieter, my own question to round off the first three rounds. I think mine was essentially how can an organization, be it a government or a multilateral development bank or a CSO, balance the need for adequate stakeholder mapping and engagement on the one hand, as well as the efficient execution of the evaluation as per timelines. And the context of that is essentially that, especially if you look at the public sector, this is often a context of parallel commitments. So there is scope, of course, for stakeholder mapping, but there are always timelines which are quite compressed. So that is my initial question. So over to you, Dieter, to give your initial responses to the first 3 questions, and I will be noting on the chat colleagues who are raising questions as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lakawu. So on the first question, Sarah, yes, indeed, I think. Thank you very much for your insight. I think my main reaction is that I think it's quite natural for people to package the evaluation in some form, right? Because you have a technical report, and then from that usually a kind of a summary report is done, and there's usually a team who then try to in some way or form, beyond just handing over a report and printing it, there's often talk about, okay, maybe we do a presentation, or maybe there's thinking about just summarizing the executive summary, perhaps. Some of you might recognize this. I think there is an automatic instinct to try and package according to what the needs are. So the only difference with the kind of thinking or the approach of stakeholder mapping is that you think about that beforehand. That I'm going to want to package this in the right way, and then you think, okay, well, I'm going to package this for who? Oh, well, the people who want to see the recommendations. Well, okay, who want to see the recommendations? And then if you keep that thinking going, then you'll find some people want to see the findings, some people want to see the recommendations, some people, and then you think about, how do they want to see it? Do they want a quick cheat sheet, or are they more academic? They want to see the methodology in the evaluation. They want to see all the findings. So I think it's a natural way of thinking to try and package their knowledge. Then the difference with stakeholder mapping is that you simply think about it earlier instead of after the evaluation. I think is the kind of my main reaction to your insight. The question of how do you handle a situation where you have different stakeholders and different way of approaching. I think it's safe to say that's almost every evaluation. There will always be different stakeholders who have different knowledge needs and different ways of consuming knowledge, and different ways of the best way of engaging with the stakeholders. So the challenge is that it's work, right? If you have, let's say, break it down to 2 different stakeholders. One is the board of directors, or some kind of overarching kind of group of senior directors of some kind, who have maybe started or instructed the evaluation to be carried out. For them, typically you might have the report to provide with a presentation of some kind of a report launch, and they will be present, etc. And then possibly throughout the evaluation, you also have various meetings and discussions to talk about the evaluation. So that's one group. But then let's say you have another group of people who are more, let's say it's related to strategy. So this is the strategy department. And for the evaluation, you might have talked a little bit to strategy department, but you've talked a lot more to, let's say, beneficiaries, to departments in terms of outcomes, to process departments, to see like how it is all implemented. And they might not be as aware or feel as much ownership of the evaluation. Then it's like, okay, well, that requires a different approach. That requires an approach of raising awareness for those specific groups. So you might need a little bit of a communications campaign, some emails, some posters in the office, some screensavers, social media, where you might want to create, let's say, an infographic of the immediate results or findings of an evaluation. So the challenge lies in indeed identifying who there is and what is the best way of reaching them. It is not that easy, because in my presentation I kind of said, okay, well, identify the knowledge needs, as if you're going to have a book somewhere that says, okay, these are the knowledge needs. It's not always as apparent. So sometimes it requires contacting specific stakeholders during the evaluation, and rather than asking them the questions of the evaluation, also asking them about knowledge needs, right? Or sometimes you have to make some assumptions about, okay, well, this knowledge looks like it is very crucial and important to people implementing a certain project. And I think the hardest thing, actually, that's something that, but yeah, so now all I was saying is that it is sometimes hard to know what the knowledge needs are. It's hard to know, because, I think this is another topic of conversation, and a very large one. You might have a specific group where you say, okay, these are supposed knowledge needs, but perhaps the knowledge is already there. And then what you end up doing is you end up sending them a package of things that they already know. So there are definitely some challenges, especially in the knowledge need area. I think that is the hardest of it all. So that kind of brings me to the other part of the question, which was, what are the challenges? It is very hard to know what the knowledge needs really are. And I think in terms of how, I think that brings me to your question, Dr. Tlakabu. How do you do this when you have a limited set of resources, a limited set of time? We have the advantage that at IDEV we have an entire department dedicated to knowledge management, outreach, to building evaluation capacity development. So we can do all of this work whilst the evaluation team, let's say, is in country conducting evaluations. We can provide them guidance on maybe how to, and sometimes we've been recently even going into the field with these evaluation teams. So this can be done during the evaluation. In terms of timing, it can be done during the evaluation. But indeed, if you have a team to do that. So yes, there is indeed a resource challenge there. And perhaps the answer could be, if you don't have large teams and you don't have a separate department, is to try, I think evaluators could also be very good candidates for trying to do this exercise. So then it's a matter of building their capacity to understand stakeholder mapping a little bit, understand how engagement and outreach works in terms of reaching stakeholders, how to, because I think evaluators are very well placed to identify knowledge needs, which is our challenge as a knowledge management officer. Evaluators actually sometimes have a very good idea of that. So perhaps that is kind of an entryway to kind of overcome these challenges of resources and time, is by making the evaluation teams more versed and have the better capacity to do a bit of stakeholder mapping for their evaluations. I hope that answers all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dieter, for responding to firstly Ms. Sarah Ngobo from the Department of Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation in South Africa, as well as Mr. Alois Ratemo, who is the director of the M&E Directorate in Kenya. We've got two follow-up questions, I think three now. So let me first start with Renato Mirula, and I hope I'm not butchering the surname there. Apologies, colleague. So here it is, Dieter. Thanks, Dieter, for this presentation. My question is about the possibility of engaging stakeholders in the design of the evaluation, and in particular, for developing the evaluation questions. Does any engagement happen at this stage? So that's the first question, Dieter. And then from Sindisiwe Mabaso, from the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Health, this is the question. Are there any tools to manage or identify blind spots or risks in stakeholder mapping? For example, a very senior manager initially not identified as having either influence or interest in the evaluation project now threatens to derail or even stop project implementation. So that's the second question, Dieter. And then let me take the third question from Mr. Diniko Setwaba, also from DPME. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. My question is, should the purpose of the evaluation be explicit on the stakeholders that the evaluation is targeting? And the second part is so that the dissemination plan can be customized to meet their information needs of those stakeholders. So that is Mr. Diniko Setwaba. I'm not sure if you would want to take a fourth, Dieter, because there's a fourth one that just emerged now, or you want to respond to these first.
I'll respond to the first three, but could you repeat it? I wasn't very clear on the third question. Could you repeat it, or is it in the chat perhaps?
So the third question is, should the purpose of the evaluation be explicit on the stakeholders that the evaluation is targeting? And then the second part of Mr. Diniko's question is so that the dissemination plan can be customized to meet their information needs, those stakeholders he's mentioning. So that's the second part of the question.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, I'll answer the last question first, actually. It's an important point. I think it's a discussion I've had quite often in terms of the purpose of an evaluation and whether it's should it always be explicitly targeted for stakeholders, and should it be made explicit as such to stakeholders? In my mind, yes, very much so. But I think there is sometimes that's not always how evaluations come to fruition. Sometimes an evaluation does come to fruition because of a desire or a wish from, well, actually, it depends on the stakeholder, right? So I think if an evaluation is mandated, let's say by the board of directors in our case, right? IDEV, we have a board of directors and we have a specific committee. It's called CODES, Committee for Operational Development and Effectiveness. And a lot of the evaluations that we do, not all, but a lot are kind of put into our work program in cooperation with this board of directors. That makes them automatically a stakeholder as one of the groups that have mandated this evaluation. However, I think the purpose of the evaluation should, as much as possible, be purposeful for all stakeholders. And it comes down to a little bit of the question of the balance between accountability and learning when it comes to evaluations. Okay, I'm a knowledge management officer, so perhaps I'm biased, but there is some still discussion about, is an evaluation an accountability tool where you're holding the different groups or stakeholders accountable for the efforts, the work, the money that has been put into a certain project, and often it's something like a board kind of entity who wants to make sure that everyone is held accountable for our efforts. What are the actual results of this evaluation due to these efforts? But for me, the way I see it is that there's, the best way to be accountable is to learn from your work, what has worked, what hasn't, and improve on it. If things have failed, what is more accountable than accepting that failure and learning from it and trying to prevent it from happening again through learning, through having the right stakeholders, having the right information. So to answer that question, purpose, yes, I think it should definitely be purpose to, and that can be made quite explicit. The stakeholders, I think it's important that the stakeholders know this, that this evaluation is not an audit of the work that has been done. This evaluation belongs to everyone, and it is there to make everyone's work better. right? So I hope that kind of answers that question. And then I think the first question had to do with does the stakeholder mapping happen at yes. So the design of the evaluation can be influenced in some way by the stakeholders identified. Basically, for some evaluations, there's often these kind of ground missions that the evaluations teams do, where they go. It's called a scoping mission, and in that scoping mission, they, it's not as explicit as what we do with the stakeholder mapping, because they kind of go there with quite an open mind. But the scoping mission will start to identify the key stakeholders, beneficiaries, the kind of people they want to talk to. And it's after a scoping mission like that that they kind of develop their inception report and the approach paper. So yes, and yes. The short answer to that question is yes. Through things like scoping missions, the evaluation design are and can be designed according to the stakeholders. But then again, this is not something that where our teams are, for example, that explicitly involved in, and I think that's actually a very good point. That's something that we could actually explore further to make sure that basically that from stakeholder missions you can get a more detailed, more granular, more comprehensive idea of stakeholders and how to map them, and that can then influence how the evaluation is designed. But as I mentioned, we have these these different areas where we start thinking about stakeholder mapping, and we do it from the very beginning, and it does inform the inception report or the approach paper, which is essentially the design of the evaluation. So then the second question had to do with risk. Actually, also a very important point, and I think it's something that perhaps on our side we can think about more explicitly. With every kind of outreach and communications and every activity, there's always a risk involved, and a risk should be always thought about in a very strategic and comprehensive way. The way that what I've kind of described and the way we've kind of handled it is that when you look into the different roles of the of the stakeholders, you could also look at what risk that group would hold to the evaluation. For example, let's say a department, you're evaluating, again, we'll look at COVID-19. You're conducting the evaluation of the bank's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You're interviewing operations officers, people who've designed and implemented projects, who've dispersed budgets to let's say counterparts, ministries of health, and you haven't come with the right approach. You're kind of there. Okay, you have to answer these questions. I'm here to evaluate you, and the person feels a bit weary, and they might not be as open to divulge very important knowledge to you. A lot of knowledge is tacit. It's not always in the numbers. A lot of the knowledge is, well, the numbers are good, but actually we had to work day and night to get there. And there was a lot of back and forth, and we actually felt a bit unorganized, but we got there in the end. They might not tell you that. They might say, yeah, look, see, we got there, it's fine. But it's important to know that the department maybe was caught off guard, and they had to work tirelessly to get the right result. Maybe they needed better support. So indeed, it is important to kind of have the right approach, and there are risks to stakeholders. Or let's say another stakeholder, a board of directors, could not approve the evaluation. That is a risk. So so then you're talking about, okay, the quality of the evaluation, all the other things. So yeah, for every stakeholder, in addition to role, you can then also put risk. Indeed, yes. I think that answers the three, I hope.
Yeah, thank you very much for your insightful answers, Dieter. I think there's one last question on the chat, and then probably I'll just throw in one final one myself, and then you can do your final reflections. So Willie Gallis asks in the chat, So this is how it goes. Thanks for the presentation. Do you agree there should be a management plan on stakeholders engagement and stakeholder engagement monitoring? So that is the question from Willie. And then my final question, Dieter, really to just complement the question is, from your experience and observation, is there a correlation between adequate stakeholder analysis and engagement and evaluation evidence use? So that's my small question. Over to you.
Sorry, could you reply? Is there are you asking, is there a correlation between having a plan and the use?
So basically, I was just asking if there's a correlation between stakeholder analysis and thereafter engagement, and then what do you find afterwards? Do you find that there is greater use of evidence once there is adequate stakeholder engagement?
I'll answer your question first. We haven't yet, as I said, we've been developing the stakeholder mapping more and more over the last 5 years. We haven't, I think, done a good yet, like a comprehensive benchmarking and results analysis. But generally, we do find that there's a lot more interest and uptake, a lot more reaction, a lot more requests from teams from within the bank and externally, since we've started, in kind of developing more and more our knowledge products and our stakeholder engagement. But we haven't, I won't be able to provide you statistical correlations as such, but and I think it is important. I see actually Jane, who's actually our manager for engagement and knowledge management, and her hand is up, so perhaps she wants to add to this. But this is actually something that, that we definitely want to kind of try and do in a more systematic and comprehensive way to showcase how this is, so for example, we do a presentation soon, we can showcase how this actually improves engagement and learning. And the other question had to do with, should there be a management plan on stakeholder mapping? Yes, indeed. I mean, like that's what we call our dissemination plan. So in our dissemination plan, there is an explicit kind of guide to, okay, these are the stakeholders. These are and it's a little bit like I kind of showed you some of the tables that we include. We have our stakeholders, we have their knowledge needs, we have the kind of knowledge products that they want, and then we have the way that we can maybe disseminate the products. So what's the channel? How are we going to engage? And that then develops kind of we call it dissemination plan, but you could call it a knowledge management and engagement plan. So yes, it definitely should be part of a plan. Thank you. And perhaps if it's okay, could I suggest maybe, because Jane's hand is up, maybe she wants to add to that?
Yeah, I actually wanted to bring her in. Thanks, Dieter. Madam Musumba, over to you.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Dieter, for quite an insightful presentation. So just listening to you and listening to our own experiences, sometimes it helps also to acknowledge the learning that has happened. Let me just emphasize for the last 5 years, as Dieter has mentioned. Let me just come back to the question that was raised by CDCWay. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And this has to do with the risk management in stakeholder mapping and stakeholder engagement. As Dieter mentioned, the process has evolved in the last 5 years, and we're still getting surprises and we are learning, so nothing is set in stone. Like everything else, any process that you undertake, there are always risks involved. So for example, one of the tools that I would mention, maybe Dieter, you can show that presentation again, the quadrant that you shared in regard to the high interest, low interest, high influence versus low influence. That quadrant is very, very important in the stakeholder mapping, not only in stakeholder mapping, but also in the stakeholder engagement itself, because we keep coming back to this. We keep adding in terms of the roles, we keep adding or even deleting some of the needs that we thought were identified, so we keep revising that as we go along. Now, maybe Dieter didn't really emphasize in terms of the grouping, in terms of having the internal versus the external stakeholders. So for example, with the internal stakeholders, there's an evaluation reference group that is composed at the beginning of the evaluation. And there's a terms of reference that is shared with all the members of this ERG, the evaluation reference group. Now, tying to the question that was raised, whereby you have one stakeholder who has great influence or interest who may derail the implementation of a project. Yes, we sometimes get surprised like that in the evaluation reference group, where somebody feels or department they feel was not comprehensively consulted or engaged in the process. So there could be also misunderstanding within the evaluation reference group vis-a-vis the unit that was engaged, vis-a-vis the department that was being engaged. So having that continuous engagement, and being cognizant of the various people, the various roles that they play is something that we really have to be mindful of. So just to emphasize, nothing is set in stone. At the beginning of the evaluation, how the mapping looks, sometimes at the end, it's going to look very different, Is the same way with the engagement, is the same way with the needs that have been identified at the beginning. They may not be so, and this actually that relates to also the resources that we have at hand. So looking at the quadrant also actually, it helps us to make those decisions in terms of the high interest, the low interest, high influence, low influence. Where are we going to really focus our resources on? What products we should be developing? How are we developing them? And how are we going to share them with these various stakeholders? So I just wanted to emphasize the point of resources, which actually relates to the time, relates to money, relates also to the skills at hand, the capacities that we have within the team. And also just to mention the tool that, we found to be quite useful is the quadrant that Dieter just shared, So we keep making reference going back and forth to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for also emphasizing the quadrant as a parting shot. Colleagues, mindful of time, I think let me bring to a close this session by firstly highlighting the importance of this mechanism of stakeholder mapping and engagement as one of the key tools available to us in the evaluation sphere to sort of influence or address the common issue of lack of use of evaluation findings. So once more, thank you very much, Dieter, as well as IDEV, as key regional partners of Twendembele, and how you continue to enrich our learning agenda. Reaching our participants with key insights into various stages of an evaluation, mindful from the first presentation given by Madam Musumba on the importance of communication in not just evaluation, but monitoring and evaluation, and bringing it over now to Dieter, who has just taken us through stakeholder mapping. And then also to thank the participants on the call for being crucial learning agents and taking in all this information, because without an audience, really, learning events are not necessarily reaching the right target. So we are certainly grateful for making time out to be part of this learning event of ours. So in the same breath, we'd like to also retain your attention for the next learning session, which will be in February 2023, where IDEV will be completing its three-part series of the learning events of Twendembele, where we will be looking at developing an evaluation dissemination plan. So thank you once again, Dieter and the IDEV team for your constant engagement with our participants and your contribution to Twendembele. And a very good evening to the participants as well as everyone else. So thank you very much, colleagues. So we will see you in February 2023. So have a safe festive season and close out the year, of course, strong and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye.